In Laputa, there were two kinds of civilizations or sciences, one that produced things like the levitation stone, utterly impossible to replicate, and another, like the robots, that humans could just barely understand. The early Laputa civilization, now completely forgotten and unrecorded, aimed to approach the realm of gods to meet them by floating their city in the sky. However, in the later Laputa civilization, once they realized they could never meet the gods, they turned to ruling the earth through fear. It became a world dominated by terror and dark power. I believe the film merges these two eras, the sacred and the corrupted, into a single narrative. Tonight on Friday Roadshow, Castle in the Sky will finally air. To coincide with that, this seminar is releasing 3 consecutive Laputa analysis videos yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Today's, the second, covers the 4 remaining themes that didn't fit into yesterday's discussion. Good evening. This is the Toshio Okada seminar. In yesterday's video, I talked about Laputa's mysterious erotic expressions, its contradictory criticism of civilization, and 3 unexplained characters. In today's video, I'll focus on the remaining 3 themes: Laputa as science fiction, the Phantom Industrial Revolution, and Barusu and Hayao Miyazaki. In the free portion, the main topic is Laputa as science fiction. We'll analyze Miyazaki's handwritten notes preserved in the production materials to uncover the secrets of the Laputans who once built the floating city. This is a rebroadcast of the 213th Okada seminar, originally released on January 14, 2018. Now, let's begin the free segment. This is the second part of the Laputa commentary from last week, an in-depth overview of Castle in the Sky. For those familiar with my 4-type classification, you already know. Miyazaki is the ideal type, Takahata is the law type, and Suzuki is the command type. However, even though Miyazaki is an ideal type, he leans slightly toward the passionate side, so when he gets carried away, he makes sudden press conference statements or retirement declarations typical of that temperament. Takahata, on the other hand, shows little interest in others' feelings. He lacks the very concept. When he refused to produce Nausicaa, Miyazaki wept while drinking, and Suzuki said, "Mr. Takahata, can't you understand Miyazaki's feelings?" Takahata was surprised and said, "Miyazaki has feelings," and hurriedly agreed to be producer. Takahata is a pure law type, while Suzuki, being a command type, insists on saying "I won no matter what happens." He has a strong habit of claiming victory regardless of context. Still, what's interesting about Suzuki is his idea of the right turn rule. When command types are in good form, they shift toward the law type. That means instead of focusing on winning or losing against others, they judge whether they achieved results they can personally accept, whether their own hypotheses proved true. So when Suzuki writes books, he's more of a law type, which makes his works engaging. But in meetings, his command side bursts out, giving off a slightly overbearing vibe. That's my 4-type perspective on Studio Ghibli's internal dynamics. So inevitably, the studio ends up resembling the passionate type Miyazaki, lifting up a young female staff member as if she were an idol, and everyone around pampering her. That's the impression I got when I watched The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness. It was just my amused observation. Now, let's start with Laputa's appeal. Previously, I mentioned I'd talk about this in the latter half, so I've written it down. As I was preparing, it evolved a bit. In the first half, we covered mysterious eroticism, contradictory criticism of civilization, and unexplained characters. Today, we'll go into the second half. We'll discuss Laputa as science fiction, the Phantom Industrial Revolution, and Barusu and Miyazaki. What exactly is Barusu? People say it means peace in Turkish, or that it's the word of destruction as explained in the film. But I think that's false, and I'd like to explore that idea today. So today, we'll begin with Part 4 Laputa as science fiction. Let's dive into it. There's a book called Profiles of the Future by British science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke, the man who wrote the original story for 2001. A Space Odyssey. It's a documentary-style nonfiction work that introduces Clarke's famous 3 laws. In that book, he wonders what would happen if you showed Leonardo da Vinci, Archimedes, or Galileo a helicopter or an automobile. It's often cited to show how hard it is to predict the future. Some say old novels and comics already predicted everything, while others argue that people of the past were completely wrong. Clarke, however, proposed a consistent principle. If you brought people like Da Vinci, Archimedes, and Galileo to the modern era and showed them airplanes or cars, they'd probably understand the principles almost immediately without confusion because such physical concepts are extensions of the theories they already knew. But if you showed them televisions, computers, or nuclear reactors, they wouldn't understand right away. Without the conceptual framework of electrons or electricity, it would take them time. Clarke writes that the simplest example of this is the atomic bomb at its core. It's just two pieces of uranium that, when joined, cause an explosion. If you told a late 19th century scientist, combine these and you'll get an explosion equal to 20,000 tons of coal, they'd look at you in disbelief and calmly ask, "Do you even know the laws of thermodynamics?" They lecture you about advanced physics, far more sophisticated than what we understand. So those scientists would dismiss you, believing they were much more knowledgeable. They'd think such a thing violated the known principles of energy and heat. That's how Clarke illustrated the limits of imagination and understanding between eras. They would carefully explain every physical law and chemical reaction to prove how impossible it is for two metals to simply touch and release energy as heat. That's how far outside their conceptual framework nuclear reactions were something completely unimaginable for people of that era. From those patterns, Clarke summarized his ideas into 3 laws of future prediction. Here they are. First, when an elderly, distinguished scientist says something is possible, he's almost certainly right. But when he says something is impossible, he's probably wrong. That's Clarke's first law. The second law, the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. The third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This third one is famous, but the second is a bit harder to grasp. Clarke argued that unless repeated experiments definitively prove phenomena like telepathy or psychokinesis don't exist, scientists shouldn't claim they're impossible. He was explaining this as a scientific mindset. The third law, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, is especially relevant. Castle in the Sky is science fiction, but it skillfully embodies this third principle. For example, the machines the Dola gang use are advanced for their time, yet still understandable. Even Pazu can comprehend them. But once the story reaches the floating city of Laputa, many machines there defy explanation. They operate on principles beyond human understanding. By contrasting these two gasoline and steam engines used by the Dola gang versus the ultra-technology of Laputa, Miyazaki created a layered world. Even within Laputa's advanced science, there are 2 distinct levels. This duality gives the film depth and a fascinating sense of authentic science fiction. Let's start with the first example, the Tiger Moth, the airship used by the Dola gang as their base. It's about 40 meters long. There aren't many detailed blueprints of it. The only complete ones were made when Miyazaki designed it for a Laputa-themed drink promotion by Ajinomoto. The propeller structure is a quadruple counter-rotating system. It's an incredibly complex mechanism. While most machines in Laputa's world run on coal and steam, the Tiger Moth uses a gasoline engine. This engine drives for propellers that rotate in opposite directions, a very intricate design. These side propellers aren't for propulsion as one might think. They're actually used to tilt the blades for vertical takeoff and landing. By reversing the blade pitch, they can control direction as well. It's an elaborate system. In the film, when Pazu visits the old engineer, we see huge gears in the background, hinting at the mechanical depth behind this design. Pazu quickly understands the mechanism and helps with repairs. In no time, he's naturally gifted with machines. This level of technology is advanced yet comprehensible. All those propellers, four-way counter-rotation, vertical lift, everything runs off a single engine. That makes the power transmission extremely complex. But that kind of setup was actually common in factories during the Industrial Revolution. It may be hard to picture, but take a look at this engraving, an example of a large-scale factory from that era. You can see belts running up toward the ceiling. A single main shaft overhead connects to an external steam engine outside the factory. That engine spins rapidly, and belts transmit that power to each worker's loom, allowing the weaving machines to operate. Each woman has her own loom in front of her, but the power source is the steam engine outside. It spins furiously, turning a massive shaft along the ceiling, and from there, belts transfer the energy to each machine inside the factory. A clearer example remains in Lancashire, England. This photo shows a spinning and weaving factory. You can see the huge shaft overhead driving the belts that power the machinery. It's a striking image of 19th century industrial engineering. Miyazaki's eye for detail in Laputa's mechanical designs reflects this world. Gears appear often, but so do pulleys and belts. When Pazu helps operate the steam engine, he's switching gears manually. Those are all clutch operations, just like old factories used to have. The Tiger Moth's design clearly shows that level of mechanical complexity, advanced power transmission for its time. All the controls are handled on site. The crew in the engine room likely adjusts the propellers, shifting gears and belts manually, similar to how a bicycle chain switches between sprockets on a multi-gear bike. That's essentially how it works. The Dola gang members on the bridge only issue commands through voice tubes, shouting orders like "do this" or "change that," but the actual operations are performed manually by the engineers below. This separation of command and operation orders from the bridge actions on the floor was cutting-edge thinking at the end of the 19th century. It later evolved into what became modern automation systems. Up to this point, it's more adventure machinery than pure science fiction. Incidentally, the Tiger Moth also has a rear hatch for launching gliders, though the lid design makes it hard to open. This launch bay is a direct homage to Mobile Suit Gundam, reminiscent of how the white base ship deployed its mobile suits. And remember the Xeon carriers in Gundam, they all launch from the front, which is aerodynamically impossible. Miyazaki thought, that makes no sense, they should launch from the rear, and he included that subtle jab in Laputa's design. You can sense his playful critique there. So, within Laputa, when viewed as science fiction, the tiger moth just barely qualifies as adventure-level technology. Now, let's move on. What about the flaptor? You know, the one with a wing that broke off. It's simple, you just reattach it. The flaptor operates with artificial muscles powered by electricity, making it partially science fiction. It's cranked by hand with a starter, giving it a retro feel, but the idea of generating electricity through a motor-driven generator was already quite innovative for its supposed era. In fact, generators were invented before motors. The motor itself was discovered at the 1873 Vienna Exposition when an engineer accidentally sent electricity into a generator, causing it to spin, thus discovering the motor by mistake. But the creator of the flaptor, or rather, its inventor within the story, didn't fully grasp this relationship between generators and motors. They imagined using an engine to power a generator, which in turn would supply electricity to drive artificial muscles. That was the concept. This idea traces back to the Italian physician and physicist Luigi Galvani in the late 18th century, who discovered that a dead frog's legs would twitch when exposed to an electric current. His portrait famously depicts a frog's corpse with the electrodes attached, quite a grim legacy. It was a sensational discovery at the time. In European salons, alongside sports and art, such scientific discussions were all the rage. The poet Lord Byron read about Galvani's experiment and, fascinated, gathered with his friend Percy Shelley and Shelley's 16-year-old fiancée Mary at a villa on Lake Geneva. They decided to each write a story inspired by this idea of reanimating life. In the end, only Mary Shelley completed hers, the novel Frankenstein, written when she was just 16. As I mentioned about a year and a half ago, that's how one of the most famous science fiction stories was born. So, up to this point, the flaptor still operates within the realm of understandable machinery, gears, shafts, and tangible mechanics. But with its artificial muscles, we start crossing into science fiction territory. Now, the third element, the robot soldiers. There's no denying it, they are pure science fiction. This is where the film fully steps into the SF genre. In one scene, Muska says to Shida, "We don't even know whether their material is clay or metal," acknowledging the mystery of their very composition. They appear as completely incomprehensible beings. The material stretches and contracts freely. According to Miyazaki's own notes, they're made of shape memory ceramics, a substance that can be both soft and hard. It's impossible to disassemble or repair, and no one knows its component lifespan. Aside from the one that fell and broke, all others have decayed with time, but no one can even tell whether the deterioration came from wear in their moving parts. Yet others have functioned perfectly after being untouched for 1,000 years, an eerie testament to their design. It's terrifying machinery, perhaps with zero friction in its joints. The power source is unknown. No one knows if it uses fuel or batteries. It even accelerates through rocket propulsion, yet there's no visible fuel or exhaust system. How it works is a complete mystery. Even when the battleship Goliath fires at it point blank and destroys it, this robot soldier is still one of the more primitive machines in Laputa's world. I'll explain later, but I divide Laputa's civilization into two phases, the early and late Laputa eras. I'll show my reasoning later, but the early Laputa civilization is completely beyond comprehension, like the technology behind the levitation stone. Later, Laputa came to dominate the world through force. Musca represents that belief that Laputa was a noble, godlike power. That was the era of the late Laputa civilization when power and fear ruled. These robots likely date from that later period. While incomprehensible to 19th century humans, to us they still seem just barely within the realm of possibility. However, the puzzling part is this: where exactly does our understanding end? When Sheeta chants the spell "Protect Me," the robot awakens. In that cross-section, you can see strange, writhing inner parts moving. Interestingly, the upper arms section moves, but the detached part on the other side doesn't react at all. In other words, the central body still contains the power source, and only the parts connected to it respond to Sheeta's plea. The severed hand remains lifeless. That's something we can still understand. It follows the logic of machines. Connected parts move, disconnected ones don't. So, even though its movements look organic, almost alive, it's simply complex mechanics at work. Despite its mysterious motion, the robot still falls within the bounds of technology we can comprehend just barely. So, the robots in Laputa are based on barely understandable technology. But from here, we enter Laputa's realm of superscience. The truly incomprehensible SF element begins with the levitation stone, the crystal Sheeta wears around her neck. Her mother told her to keep it secret. It's pure science fiction, what Clarke's third law would call indistinguishable from magic. It only responds to commands from Laputa's royal bloodline and clearly possesses anti-gravity properties. Yet it draws no visible energy from anywhere. Because it's all shown through animation, it appears to share the same mysterious technology as the robot soldiers and the Laputa city, but there's an obvious hierarchy. The robots remain within our grasp of understanding. The stone, however, is at least 1,000 years more advanced. The key difference is assembly. The robots can be disassembled after crashing, revealing how they were built. The levitation stone, however, has no assembly marks. It's a single seamless crystal, impossible to take apart or analyze. Like an iPhone, the robots can be broken down no matter how complex. But the stone can't. It's one transparent piece. It's not just incomprehensible. It's indivisible, a complete solid with no visible mechanism. When it emits a beam of light pointing toward Laputa, even the light source is untraceable. It just radiates from within. That's not ignorance on Miyazaki's part, it's deliberate. He fully understood Clarke's third law and used it to illustrate the gradual layers of Laputa's scientific advancement. At the very least, it reacts to voice, so it must have voice recognition. And since it identifies Laputa's heir, it must also include some form of genetic authentication. Yet even that doesn't explain the anti-gravity energy it produces. If Sheeta weighs around 40 kilograms, countering gravity from a height of 1,000 meters would require roughly 4,000,000 joules of energy, around 900,000 calories. Generating that from a 5-gram stone would demand efficiency approaching nuclear reactions. At the end of the film, Laputa is covered with greenery. That's partly Miyazaki's artistic choice, but also because the levitation stone itself has the power to nurture plants. In interviews, he said the stone represents the sacred life force of the universe. Thanks to it, Sheeta was able to live. He even explained that crops flourished wherever the levitation stones existed. The reason Laputa's trees could grow, he said, draws inspiration from Osamu Tezuka's phoenix, where the divine source of life nurtures the world itself. This comes from Osamu Tezuka's 1960s manga about isotope farms. An isotope farm had a central tower-emitting radiation. In one scene, a boy held by a broken robot cries, "Let me go." But after half a day of exposure, he suffers severe radiation poisoning. It's part of the story of Robita. That incident later leads to Robita's death sentence. The idea behind isotope farms was that radiation exposure seemed to make plants grow better, a concept actually reported in the 1950s and 60s. Back then, the effect of radiation on plant growth was seriously studied. Today, with global anti-nuclear sentiment, such research has mostly vanished and the original data is lost. But, like the old man Palm says in the film, the levitation stone emits energy that quickly dissipates. I believe Miyazaki used it as a metaphor for nuclear power, an immense force humans should not touch. As I mentioned before, Miyazaki always presents ideas in complex, indirect ways. If something symbolizes nuclear power, most creators would highlight that connection, but Miyazaki deliberately hides it, making it subtle and open to interpretation. So, the blue light emitted by the stone represents untouchable natural energy created by humans. That blue glow recalls the Cherenkov radiations seen near nuclear fuel rods inside a reactor. It occurs when charged particles move faster than light within a medium, releasing the excess energy as blue light. Of course, in our world, nothing travels faster than light in a vacuum, but in water or other mediums, light slows down, so when those particles decelerate to light speed, the energy difference radiates as that beautiful blue glow. Godzilla's glowing back is also a depiction of Cherenkov radiation. So, when the original Godzilla's back glows before breathing fire, it symbolizes a nuclear reaction occurring inside its body. That concept existed long before Shin Godzilla. It's part of the series' classic imagery. Now, many have said the levitation stone in Laputa resembles the blue water gem from Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. Since this topic comes up often, I'd like to make this the definitive explanation once and for all. In Nadia, I personally handled the initial concept and design of the blue water. I decided its basic properties and function, but as the anime progressed, it became increasingly difficult to use that concept within the story. So I handed it over to Anno, letting him adjust it however he liked. Eventually, when he ran out of ideas, he came back to me and asked, "Okada-san, what exactly was that thing again?" When I explained the concept to Anno, he would just pick out the parts he found most convenient to use. So, let me describe the original idea of the blue water I created. Of course, it came after Laputa, so you could say it was inspired by Miyazaki's work. NHK had an old Miyazaki proposal called Round the World in a Reversible Universe, and they told us to develop something like that. So I had to improvise and build a setting from scratch. I made the blue water a relic of ancient Atlantis, a control key and power source for all ruins, including Babel's Tower, but it's not actually a material object. The blue water is a program pure information. That information is so vast that it appears to have mass, volume, even texture. Its density is so immense that it manifests physically. It contains the positional information of every atom that has ever existed on Earth from the planet's birth to the present day. So, with a single blue water, you could theoretically recreate Earth, its life, humanity, and every civilization ever built, a perfect IT-based record of the world. It's just a recording device, but because of its infinite data, it takes physical form in our dimension. In the opening sequence, when you zoom in close, you see infinitely detailed patterns. That's the first visible layer of its internal structure. Beyond that, there are over 10 more layers of intricate systems, though our physical reality would only allow us to perceive the outermost few levels. Here's the key point. Gargoyle, the main antagonist, like the final remnant of the Nazis, never truly understands what the blue water is, even at the end. Nor does Captain Nemo, despite my efforts to explain the concept. Even director Anno struggled to grasp it fully. That's why everyone in the show fights over the blue water, but the struggle is meaningless. It's merely a recorder, an archive of existence. No one can actually use it, which makes their conflict all the more tragic. The Secret of Blue Water was designed as an homage to Laputa, and of course, Laputa itself symbolically appears in the series. The Babel Tower functions like Laputa's light weapon, and the massive ancient spaceship Red Noah represents Laputa's floating citadel. Neo-Atlantis and the new Nautilus share that same lineage. However, Red Noah, which appears near the finale, is curious. It doesn't even have interplanetary flight capability. When Atlantis reawakens, it floats in Earth's atmosphere but never goes beyond it. Why? Because it was never meant to leave the planet. It isn't even a shuttle between Earth and orbiting satellites, and that Babel Tower scene in Nadia. The ring of reflective satellites around it makes it look like a giant weapons system, but its true purpose is something very different. But that's not correct. Those satellites aren't weapons, they're communication lasers. The output is so powerful that if aimed at Earth, it could serve as a weapon, but its true purpose is as a transmitter capable of sending signals hundreds or even thousands of light years away. Using orbital relay satellites, energy can be transmitted anywhere on Earth. It's an incredibly sophisticated system. And while it's never shown in the anime, the ancient Atlanteans were extraterrestrial beings, and this network was designed to communicate with their original homeworld. The misunderstanding mirrors real-world history. For example, the microwave oven was discovered by accident in the U.S. during radar experiments after World War II, and engineer Percy Spencer, I think, stood in front of a radar unit and the chocolate bar in his pocket melted. That led to the invention of the microwave oven, originally a radar device repurposed for cooking. The first thing they made was popcorn. In the same way, characters like Gargoyle and even Captain Nemo misunderstood the radar-like function, treating it as a weapon instead. So, when they activated the Babel Tower, they thought they were using a destructive weapon, but in reality, it was a communication system designed to contact the original Atlanteans about 100 light-years away. In my original draft, the story ended with these godlike creators returning to Earth in the year 1991, but that idea was, of course, rejected. I had several possible endings, but all were scrapped. The main concept, though, was to reimagine the 19th century fascination with the unexplored world of the sea and connect it to humanity's search for new, mysterious encounters, a continuation of that same spirit of discovery. And this same pattern appears in Laputa. What's believed to be a weapon, the Indra's arrow that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, is likely the same kind of misunderstood technology. Now, let's move to the fifth SF element in Laputa. Let's talk about Laputa itself. We're almost out of broadcast time, so let's extend a bit. The opening scene shows Laputa floating with propellers beneath it. When I first saw that opening, I felt slightly disappointed. I thought, oh, Miyazaki's doing another retro airship with propellers, but it turned out to be completely different. That unexpected twist is part of Laputa's brilliance. The idea is that people in the story only imagine flight through propellers because that's all they can conceive of. In truth, Laputa's science is far more advanced. Similarly, Muska recognizes Laputa's power but misinterprets it, believing it to be a weapon for domination. That misunderstanding is what makes the story so fascinating. The visual concept of Laputa, as many of you know, was inspired by Bruegel's Tower of Babel. Another influence was the sight of trees growing among the ruins of Angkor Wat, and we can say it's truly modeled after Babel because Miyazaki's own image boards explicitly show it. This is the actual concept art used. The layout of Laputa is drawn on the right. The top level is a temple, the realm of the heavenly emperor, so to speak, followed by the ocean of trees, then the Garden of Eden, and finally the domain of the people below. That's its hierarchical design. The concept even includes remnants of the ground that once existed before Laputa floated into the sky. In other words, the city was originally on the earth, then lifted upward. I once questioned whether Muska's claim that Laputa ruled the world with science was really true. My theory is that the early Laputa civilization, now completely forgotten, built the floating city to reach the gods. The word temple written in Miyazaki's notes supports this. Laputa was a replacement for Babel's tower, created to approach the divine. They aimed for the heavens, but when the later Laputa civilization realized they could never meet the gods, they turned to ruling the earth instead through fear and power. That's the Laputa Muska knows, a civilization that dominated the world through nuclear-like terror, combining two eras into one legend. As for the temple, it wasn't a place of worship, but a dwelling meant to welcome gods. The Laputans sought divinity, and when they couldn't reach it by flight, they built the temple as a final attempt. Perhaps they were beings who lived among the stars, humanoid yet extraterrestrial. They received technology from those cosmic beings but never understood its core principles. Thus, within Laputa there existed two levels of science, the incomprehensible over technology like the levitation stone and the more human understandable mechanics such as the robots. You might ask, come on, Okada, isn't that just your imagination? But there's evidence in Miyazaki's own handwritten notes where certain lines were written and then erased. That's the key part. When we magnify that section, many of you may have seen it before. It reads, "When the living God descended from the heavens as a divine miracle, the ancient city rose into the sky." It continues, "Now, as the capital that rules the world, it reigns in the heavens." The phrase "when the living God descended from the heavens" appears twice. It implies that a divine being took human form, descended to earth, and, as proof, caused a holy city to rise into the sky. That city, it says, still reigns in the heavens as the governing capital of the world. Miyazaki wrote this but decided not to show it in the film. So, while it's part of the original concept, it wasn't discarded, just left unseen. It's one of those many ideas he chose not to reveal on screen. Thus, to overlapping civilizations exist within Laputa, Miyazaki often withholds such details. As producer Toshio Suzuki said on his radio show Ghibli Asemimire, Miyazaki only wants to depict what Pazu sees, nothing beyond his perspective. That's why, at first, the full image of Laputa wasn't drawn at all. In the film, when Laputa appears among the clouds, Miyazaki resisted showing it, saying, "Pazu hasn't seen it yet." Suzuki and Takahata had to convince him, but everyone wants to see it. So he reluctantly drew Laputa half hidden by clouds. That's how cautious he is. From what I've studied and from knowing people who worked with him, Miyazaki generates about 1,000 ideas, sketches 100 of them, and ultimately uses only 3. Out of every 1,000 inspirations, only 3 make it into the final film. He said that's what filmmaking is, coming up with countless ideas, visualizing many but using only a few. That's what makes a movie, according to Miyazaki. Suzuki also recalled that Miyazaki drew numerous versions of the aircraft shown at the beginning of Laputa but discarded almost all of them. When asked why, Miyazaki replied, "That's what filmmaking is, knowing what to leave out." He said, "You have to think of many things and discard most of them. That's how film is made." So among the unused settings for Laputa, one stands out: beings descended from the sky and gave humanity the Laputa civilization. But when they vanished, humans decided to rule the world themselves. That text still survives in his early notes. So, it's not mere imagination, there's documented evidence. And with that, we finally reach the end of part 1. Today we covered Laputa as science fiction, the Phantom Industrial Revolution, and finally Barusu and Hayao Miyazaki, which we'll explore in the next half. Please look forward to it. Thank you for watching. This concludes the free segment. The full, uncut version is available exclusively to paid members. In the continuation, we discuss the 5th theme, the Phantom Industrial Revolution, and how the 19th century in reality differs from Laputa's world. We'll also talk about Miyazaki's vision of the world he wanted to depict, and finally, the meaning behind Barusu. Why does that word endure, and what does it truly represent? To watch the rest, please join the official Toshio Okada archive on YouTube membership or Dwango's Blamaga channel. For more details, please check the video guidelines linked below. And in tomorrow's video, we'll continue with more about Laputa. See you next time.